Hello everyone and welcome to the first session of our COPS. This is the Commissioner's Oversight of Policing Services, and this is something that both myself and Olivia, our Chief Constable, are going to be doing for you, the public, regularly, so that you can put your questions to us or perhaps suggestions and ideas. So I'm just going to run through a few bits of basic housekeeping once Olivia and I have introduced ourselves, and then we're going to get started with your questions. Now, we have been asking people to send questions through over the last couple of weeks since we've been advertising tonight's first ever Hampshire Constabulary Police and Crime Commissioner live Facebook session. So I have got a couple of questions here that I'm going to get started with, and that should give you time to think about any points you want to make, get them into the chat group if you can, but please keep your comments safe for other people. Please don't be abusive, because the comments will be deleted, and we really want to answer all your questions. And really importantly, we are not going to be able to answer everybody's questions this evening, but we are going to work through them tonight and tomorrow and the next day to make sure that anyone that puts a question on there gets a response to it, because it's important that you know that we're listening and we really want your feedback. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Donna Jones and I am your relatively new Police and Crime Commissioner. I was elected in May this year, representing the 2 million people that live in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, which is a huge, huge privilege and honour for me. My criminal justice background is as a magistrate. So I served as a member of the judiciary here in Hampshire for 16 years, 13 years as a bench chair on the magistrates courts in Portsmouth. So that gave me a really good oversight. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Olivia. Olivia will tell you who she is and what her role is in a bit more detail, and then we're going to get started with some questions.
Thanks, Donna. It's great to be here for the first of these events. So important to be able to answer questions straight from all of our public. So my name's Olivia. I'm the Chief Constable here, serving the residents of Hampshire and Portsmouth and Southampton and the Isle of Wight. I've been Chief Constable now for several years, and it's my real privilege and honour, and I'm looking forward to all the questions. Thank you, Donna.
Great. So if you've just joined us, thank you very much. Please put your comments in the chat. We're here. We've got our devices, we're watching the questions as they're coming in, and it'd be really helpful if you want to ask a question about speeding traffic, about e-scooters, about antisocial behaviour, if you could say perhaps just where you live. So it could be, you know, Shirley from Bassett in Southampton or Dave from Fareham. So if it is specific to the part of Hampshire where you live, Olivia and I can tailor answers towards that, because obviously Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are large counties, rural and urban, so it would really help us. So first question, we're going to kick off with quite a topical issue, actually, and one which is very sad, particularly this week, where we've got the funerals of the tragic victims who were killed in the shootings in Plymouth just 3 weeks ago. And so first question has come in to Olivia to ask what Hampshire Police's approach towards firearms licensing is. Can Olivia explain if any lessons are being learned from Plymouth, and if Hampshire Constabulary is proposing to change its approach towards firearms licensing?
Thanks, Donna, and that's a really important question. And as you say, you know, all our thoughts are very much with those affected families directly, but also that community. It's a dreadful, dreadful thing to have happened in anywhere, and really have all the thoughts with people in Plymouth. So it's a really important question, one of which I'm really happy to answer. And when we saw those events unfold, one of my first calls was to Donna to explain what we do around here. And I have no personal knowledge of what's gone on in Plymouth licensing, and all of that will come out in the wash. So this is very much a Hampshire answer. So what happens here is, you know, yes, absolutely, policing is responsible for issuing firearms licenses. We've always had a very robust process, and the way it works is someone can apply for a license. It costs £88 for a firearms license, just shy of £80 for a shotgun license. And that buys an awful lot of checking, but it is not an exhaustive process. But what's important is we rely very heavily, and have done for over a year now, on medical expertise. So what happens is when someone applies for a license, the onus is upon them to have spoken with their GP, who then, as part of that application, gives us their view of how someone is. Because clearly, and again, without prejudging anything that comes out of inquiries into Plymouth, Clearly, if someone is fit and well enough to have a firearms license, that is an issue in itself. If they're not, we really need medical professionals to tell us. So the onus is upon them, and has been, as I say, for over a year now. And all of us in the Southeast have that oversight as well. So we get most of our applications online, and that's where you attach all those documents that are necessary, and we turn them around pretty quickly. The main concern that's in the media, again, without any local knowledge, is very much about what social media checks are done. And right now we don't do any. And I think what's one of the things that nationally is being considered, and we don't do any because actually, as I say, we rely very heavily on, you know, a medical professional. That's not our role. That's not what policing is good at. So we do put the onus there. So in terms of lessons learned, we've been waiting for some time now, and the Home Office have been working with us. And in fact, Hampshire Constabulary has been helping develop the next set of national guidance, because the current national guidance was published in 2016, and the rest, you know, a new one was imminent prior to Plymouth anyway, and that's really welcome. And it will include in it, I anticipate, things that we already do, such as that onus upon medical records up front, rather than it being a secondary thing. So I can also talk about reviews, if that's helpful, Donna, because that's one of the things that's come up very briefly. So when someone does give us a concern about someone who's a firearms license holder, so they've already got one, we very quickly check that. We go back to their medical professional to see if anything's changed, and we form a view about whether they should still have it or not. And lots of people who are going through personal crisis, because life bumps into all of us, you know, they voluntarily give up their license, sometimes for a short period, and that works really well.
I want to say as well, you know, that for people across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight that are concerned about this issue, I want you to be reassured that, you know, not all police forces have the approach that we have in terms of getting that medical sign off from your GP first. And so I want, you know, I think that Olivia and the firearms team are doing everything that they can to keep people here in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight safe. And as your commissioner, I've got no concerns about our approach. I think it's robust, and I hope other forces look at adopting it. Yesterday, when I was in meetings in London, I met with the policing minister, and he did say to me that the government are considering, and I'd like your feedback on this as the public, changing the firearms licenses to make it change the process so it would go from a 5-year license to a 10-year license, but making sure that those medical checks are built in. And actually, if you're someone who's particularly interested in this issue, please put in the chat whether or not you know, thumbs up or thumbs down, because actually for a lot of people, they don't want to have to keep applying every 5 years if it's part of your job, if you're a gamekeeper. So let me know if you would appreciate that. It would increase the cost perhaps up to £200, but certainly you would only have to pay that, as I say, once every 10 years. Thank you very much for that, Olivia. So moving on, one of my big pledges going into the election, and you know, certainly now that I'm commissioner, is to make sure that we have more police on our streets. We know that it's, you know, policing is a numbers game: more police, more detection, more prevention. So can you just give us an update on where we're at with the police uplift programme in Hampshire? Sure. Are we on track to do what we need to do by 2023? And anything else you can explain about PCSOs or specials, or you know, what the mix of officers are going to be? Sure,
thank you. So we're absolutely on track to recruit upward of our 600 that you've committed to, Donna. So that's very much on track, and you know, all credit to our recruiters and our trainers who throughout COVID frankly haven't missed a step in terms of bringing new people in. So we're coming, you know, we're 18 months in now into the 3-year uplift programme, and people are coming in thick and fast. So we brought in 156 of that 600 in year one. And now, you know, we're into 146 this year. So when I go around our training environments and see brand new officers, I was at our training place only a few weeks ago, a room of kind of 50 odd people, ranging in age from 18 to 51. Some were ex-military, ex-nurses, some were straight from university. One was a professional footballer, 10 languages amongst them. So real breadth of life experience, but all of them really united on wanting to do a great policing service for our community. So they are coming in thick and fast, and it's really great to have them. And as I go around our briefing rooms, our neighbourhood teams, there are many more officers there. Many of them there are still in training. You can imagine, you know, you get through selection. It takes you nearly a year to have what we describe as independent patrol, which means you are out without your tutor, making operational decisions, providing policing services on your own very confidently and competently. So where we are now in September means that actually we're starting to see the first bunch from the 600, which is our slice, the 20,000, coming out into independent patrol. So we are starting to see them fully fledged as officers. So we will absolutely continue to do that, and we're recruiting in all sorts of different ways. So there are lots of ways if people are interested in joining policing. There are lots of different ways you can join us, lots of different routes in. Have a look at the website, and we're really keen to hear from people who want to join us in policing. But that's going really well, Commissioner. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you very much. And, you know, I've met some of the new recruits, particularly new officers that started. I think they started in April and I was elected in May. So I've called us collectively the class of 2021. But it's been lovely to go and meet them as they were sort of a few weeks into their training. And now as they've sort of graduated, but they're sort of flying the nest and going to their individual police stations. And it was really good to catch up with them. So we had a question from Paul Wheeler, which is, when will we see more police officers following the dreadful cuts during austerity? Well, yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that, you know, reduction in policing funding across the board, particularly where there's a reduction in police officer numbers, is, you know, there is a consequence for that. And I'm hoping that the national uplift programme, the government's commitment of 20,000 extra officers, is just the start, and we should now try and redress the balance there. Martin Rawlings has asked, why can't we fund the police better? I'd happily double my council tax contributions if it doubled the officers on the streets. You know, Martin, thank you for that feedback, because one of the key things that Olivia has to do in terms of working out her budget, and then I have to do in terms of calculating what we think the preset should be here in Hampshire, is work out if you guys can afford it and if that's what you want, because my boss is you, the public. That's who I work for. And, you know, to get that kind of feedback around council tax precepting is important. It's making sure that we then spend that money wisely, but thank you for that feedback. Okay. So a question, Olivia, from Sam Poole, who says, he's from Portsmouth, and he says, what is the actual rule with e-scooters? And if I can just add another one that was sent in before that, is, you know, what are Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Constabulary doing to tackle e-scooter ASB?
Thank you, Sam, and others. And I know this is a point of enormous interest, and I really do understand why. And as a Chief Constable, I'm really keen that we get the law clarified for everyone concerned around e-scooters, because we do have quite a mixture as various pilots, which are all really welcome. And you know, there are lots of benefits to e-scooters, both in terms of efficiency and ease and ecology. There are lots and lots and lots of benefits, but I do accept entirely right now, as I sit here, that the legal position is somewhat confusing, depending on where you live and depending on you know, what you've read and so on. So currently, whilst the law is being worked through, and policing doesn't write the law, policing policies according to the law, you know, we have clearly the Road Traffic Act applies, but in certain circumstances. So we've got lots of rental trials across the force area, different rules, different exemptions, and that's all part of being a pilot, because you test and check different models, and then that will help decide ultimately what the law is. So we are very much aware that there is real nuisance around some of them, but actually a lot of people who bought them in good faith genuinely didn't realise that they were not allowed to ride them, because basically the rules around e-scooter are the same as the rules around driving a car, in terms of where you drive it, you know, how would you have to be, all those kind of things. So, and genuinely people don't know that. So our first approach in the vast majority of cases is to educate. So we explain to people, and most people we stop didn't know. So that's a real plus as far as I'm concerned, because they now do know. And then I'm sure, and we know that most people do change their behaviour. There are some people who are stubborn who don't. And what we do with those is we absolutely will move to enforcement. So the first thing we do, if we stop and we've done that education, we obviously make a note of who they are. We keep their details, and they get a warning letter. And if they do it again, then we can seize their scooter to prevent other offences. We're not doing lots of that, because we'd much rather people chose to use them safely safely and lawfully, but that's our approach now. But equally, I do want to know if there are real kind of rat runs or other locations that you're having real trouble with this, then we can help, because it is antisocial behaviour, and we will be able, with city councils, with local authorities, to get alongside and to kind of put some more policing there to try and change it. So I'd really like to hear where those problems are happening. But as I say, we are very much in an interim period right now until the law gets firmed up.
That's excellent, thank you. And actually, one of the things that I'm considering as well as Commissioner is to write to councils where the trials are happening. So in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, Portsmouth, Southampton and the Isle of Wight itself, to ask them to consider the scheme that Liverpool Council have adopted, where they have now taken to issuing fixed penalties and bans on scooters, privately owned scooters, and banning people from using the ones that are hired through the trial schemes, where they are using them to create any kind of antisocial behaviour, or for example using a private scooter that doesn't have insurance, doesn't have an MOT on the private road, because on a public road, as we know, that's illegal. But they've issued over 2,000 fines, and they are banning people for up to 6 months from using an electric scooter. Now all of this is getting fed back into the trial, because as Olivia said, it's a Department for Transport trial in certain cities and larger towns across the country, but making sure that there is an education program wrapped around scooters, because they're not going away, let's be honest. They've been used across Europe for the last 5 years now, and people in other countries are getting it right, so we need to. And I certainly think more education is required from the government, maybe public broadcast type things like we had years ago with the Green Cross Cove man, so that people understand, as Olivia has said, that using an e-scooter is like driving a motorbike, a moped. It's not like being on a push bike. It does go at pace, much faster often than cyclists go. So we do need to be very mindful of the dangers there. Okay, so we've got a question from George Lane and from Douglas Wheeler, two different questions, but on the same themes, around the 101 service. So why does 101 tell you to call 101, and then when you call 101, it tells you to call 999? I think it tells you to do that if it's an emergency, but Olivia can expand on that. And Douglas Wheeler, I think 101 needs an overhaul. It takes too long to get through, and sometimes people need to talk to somebody online, and it's just not enough.
So George and Douglas, thank you. And actually, this is a really good opportunity, thank you for giving it to me, of trying to bust some myths around the way people contact us and what that service is. And it's really important, I think, to remember that we are one of very few services where in a non-emergency, you can actually call us and you can talk to us. And what we know is only 20% of calls that come in to policing, both locally and across the UK, on the non-emergency, on 101, are actually for policing. But people understandably don't often know where to go, so they ring us because they know we'll answer it. So there is something more broadly about that. So first of all, if I can bust some myths, aside from the pingdemic in July, we monitor very carefully both the average answer time, but also the extremities of how long someone is waiting, frankly, too long. And to give you a sense of scale, in July, which is a kind of a normal busy time for us, this year was no different from any other. We had just over 25,000 999 calls in July. And over 36,000 101. That's a fairly steady early summer month kind of number for us. So we're talking big volumes. So of course, if you are one of the few kind of who's waiting a long time, then that's deeply annoying. And it shouldn't happen. And I can give those kind of figures. But for the emergencies, which is where our focus always will be, our average answer time is 12 seconds. That's all. We are right onto those. And if we get an increase in volume of those, then what happens is our other call handlers who are waiting on 101 move to 999. It's what you'd expect us to do. But we do try and resource that so that we obviously can meet most. But if 999 is busy, we will shift people to answer those. And I know you wouldn't expect me to do any differently. In terms of 101, our average speed to answer is less than 4 minutes. Think about what that is in terms of other call centres that you ring for other services at home. That is not bad. It's really not bad at all. In fact, I'm actually really proud that that's our average. But as I say, we also monitor the extremities, and we also monitor anyone who's kind of waiting for more than 10 minutes. So usually at the moment this year, that's been, no more than kind of 2%. We did have a pingdemic in July, that did go up, but we all know what happened there, and we're at the other side of that. But I am really keen, as you say in your question, if it suits people to contact us online, then do so. And I'm massively grateful to people who are choosing online services, not just in COVID period, which is obviously an obvious help for us, but routinely now, because if it suits you, it really suits me. So at the moment, we have nearly 12,000 people a month using our online services to contact us, to get updates, to share information, share documents, all those kind of things with us, which is great. And the feedback is really, really, really positive around that. So it is a big growth area for us. It never will replace the ability to talk to someone. I know how important that is, not just for people who don't have access to online, but who actually want to have a voice on the end of the phone, and we will always do that. But that's why the message when you ring 101 explains the different routes to you, so you can make a legitimate choice. What I would never want, please, is anyone who's frustrated with 101 on those days when you are waiting, and to say rare, but when it happens, please don't use the 999 for that. Don't abuse the 999 system, because if we're answering you, we're not answering someone who really needs us.
That's fantastic, thank you. And for those of you that aren't aware, there is a new document the government has produced called the Beating Crime Plan. Google it and have a look at Government Beating Crime Plan. And it was only come out a couple of months ago. And both Olivia and I have been in briefings on this and working with Home Office ministers with regards to what police forces and commissioners have got to do to take on board the recommendations. And actually one of the things in it is around 101, review of 101 services. So this is going to be a constant dialogue that Olivia and I will be having, that the senior officers in the police force will be monitoring and keeping on top of it. And actually the constabulary invested a lot of money last year in a brand new customer management platform, and actually they're just getting to grips with some of the brilliant things that it can do. But one of the things I really want it to do, which it's able, our new Deputy Chief Constable Ben Snuggs led on this and has assured me that as well as taking information in when you report things on 101, we really want to try and be giving information back. So thank you for reporting your shed break-in 2 weeks ago. We've now got 6 or 7 reports in that postcode area. Neighbourhoods are on it. Then perhaps another 2 weeks later, we've caught the person that's been doing it. He's back inside, got him back on his licence. He's been recalled. So just letting you know, whether it's by text, via email, we are getting there. Rome wasn't built in a day, but using that technology to the best of the way we can is key. Someone's talked about live captions. If you are somebody who is hard of hearing, and normally you like to watch the videos and read the subtitles, that will be done after the Facebook Live session is concluded. So I know that someone has put a comment on about that. So because we're doing this via Facebook Live, it's not possible to have the interactive subtitles as we happen. But as soon as this session is finished and we end the Facebook Live, it automatically saves as a video, and then Facebook very cleverly subtitles it. So we will make sure we get that up for you as well. Okay, so moving on to rural crime. I've got a question here, which is talking about from Lucy Follett-Maitland, who's saying that she understands the police are stretched, and that also includes in rural areas. However, they are often a reasonable distance away from where the problem is, because obviously it's a rural area. However, rural crimes like poaching, theft, and aggravated trespass often need to be tracked quickly. How can we speed up response times to catch more criminals, and as this behaviour happens, making it frustrating for people? And then Sean Byrne, on the same lines, has said, one of your high priorities is increased rural policing. It is. Thank you very much, Sean. It's my number 4 priority. And how can we make sure that we have regular representation from neighbourhoods at parish council meetings? How will you ensure rural policing is increased, and how often should parish council meetings be? Perhaps I'll cover the parish one after Olivia has spoken on Lucy's question. And Douglas Wheeler, on the same theme, rural response times are ridiculous. Maybe try facing angry members of the traveller fraternity when you know it takes up to an hour for a response to come in. So yeah, rural crime.
Donna, absolutely is one of your priorities, which is very clear, and I'm very clear, and rightly so. And 85% of our constabulary area is rural, so this is not a side issue at all for us. And you'll know that we do have a dedicated team, but it is everyone's business within the constabulary. So yes, we have Country Watch. Yes, we have fantastic volunteers in the rural community, and they're the real experts. And they do lots of work. They do lots of campaigns. They do lots of operations. They're out 24/7 doing all sorts of things, and catching an awful lot of people who are preying on the vulnerability and relying upon that isolation to commit their crimes. And we catch a lot of people with quad bikes and plant theft and everything else. So that is a real focus for us, and I'm absolutely committed to that maintaining. But that's not the whole story. So all of our districts, we have a dedicated team in every single neighbourhood, community, village, town, part of the city, and we fiercely guard that, because that is that local connection. So it's their business too. They're really close to it. They do, lots of problem solving work. They get alongside NFU, landowners and everyone else to do what we can and to pool our various tactics. There is an element of organised crime sometimes behind that. We get ahead of that. We work on intelligence, and we use all of our policing assets and some of our kind of clever ways of doing things in the rural crime as much as we do anywhere else. And I want to reassure people that's very much what we do. And actually in 2020, rural crime, not just from our own data, but from the NFU data, National Farmers Union data, went down as well. Now we know all sorts of odd things happened in crime in 2020. So I because of COVID, so I'm not in any way resting on my laurels around that one. But we did see, as I say, some increases in quad bike thefts, and we have Operation Slid, which has worked around that. In terms of visibility, I think any community, it is that if you're in an emergency situation and you're waiting for the police or the ambulance or anyone, those minutes can feel like hours. I really do get that, and we deliberately put our response officers in the places where we can get to all of our geography as quickly as we can. Exactly as you see with ambulances, when you see them parked on motorway bridges, it's exactly the same method that we use to deploy our response people. But also, don't forget, we also have all of our roads policing teams. We have dogs. They are all out and about patrolling, and they are going exactly where our intelligence tells us to go. So what I would really ask people is make sure you're telling us. Ring us up 101, do it online preferably. If it's not an emergency, of course, let us know where your problems are and when your worries are, because then we will amend our patrolling activity accordingly. We will always prioritise as best we can. We can't be everywhere for everyone. I don't sit here and say that, but we absolutely do keep the promises we make, and I'd much rather know, because then we can deal with it. So thank you for those questions, but this one is it's always been a priority. It's very much Donna's priority, and I would expect to have lots of questions on this as the months and years go by.
Yeah, and I just want to say on this one, like the questioner as one of the questioners did correctly say, that it is a priority. I've really listened to you, the community, and actually one of the first things that both Olivia and Assistant Chief Constable Maggie Blythe, who has rural crime under her local policing umbrella, reassured me, is that actually the constabulary now acknowledge that in some cases rural crime is part of serious organised crime, particularly with the port in Southampton, where we've got very expensive pieces of machine, farm equipment being stolen and on a container and out of the country within 1 or 2 hours. So by the time the farmer has woken up and realised it's left the country, it's gone. So I think the constabulary are very alive to the serious organised crime nature in some cases. Hair coursing, all of the illegal gambling that goes on behind that, and the knock-on effects. I've been out with Inspector Bishop, who's one of our lead rural crime inspectors in Hampshire. I've been out with her in the New Forest. I've been out with her in Andover. I've met with farm owners. I've met with the PCC from Dorset to talk about, so my counterpart, to talk about how we police the border, not how we police the border, but how he and I are representing people. And we both had our respective, in fact, I had a chief superintendent with me, Dave Powell, who again is very involved in rural crime. And actually it is being taken very seriously. And the constabulary have invested in drones. And some of these drones are £20,000 a piece. We've got 6 of these big drones. We've got some smaller drones. And we've been very lucky in farmers and landowners allowing the constabulary to go on there when there is a particular issue. And those drones are also being used to keep the road safe when there are particularly an accident on the M3. Get a drone up quickly. You can assess what's going on with the roads where the motorway cameras don't necessarily help you if you need to drill in on where an issue is. So a question, there's a question about parish councils. So thank you very much for making that point. And this is really part of my role, I suppose. Olivia and her staff are policing. I'm about the community engagement. I'm about representing you. So I have written to every single parish council, either chair or secretary across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and there are many, many parish councils. And I'm going to the Hampshire Association of Parish Councils. I think it's either an AGM or some kind of meeting where most or nearly all parish councils should be represented, so that I can make sure I'm giving across information about the new ASB task force I've set up, talking about the budget process, giving update on the police uplift programme. And I'm going to ask Olivia if she wouldn't mind if I can take one of her officers along with me to do that, to help me just give some information, again, probably around the local policing and neighbourhood stuff, which is what affects so many of you. There's another question that's come in from a Darren Waring, and I do think it's important that we answer both positive questions as well as the negative ones. I think I really hate it when things like this happen, if the not so nice questions get ignored. So I think it's important they're answered, and I'm going to answer this one because it's directed at me. And the question is, we'd rather have more cops than a failed political PCC. Fair enough. Look, you're entitled to your opinion, and all I would say is that by having a police and crime commissioner, me, it actually saves around £200,000 a year. So actually that has paid for more cops inadvertently, or more police officers as they are properly called, because what used to happen pre-2012, when police commissioners were first elected, there was a Hampshire Police Authority Board, and councils all across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and we're a big constabulary area, we're a big county area with the Isle of Wight as well, had 28 councillors that were all paid £10,000 a year that sat on that board. So that's £280,000. Now they also had their own staff that just supported those 28 councillors. There was a chief executive of the Police Authority Board, there was a finance officer, there was a comms person, there were admin people helping with casework. So just because you didn't see them, please be reassured they were there. And what the government felt, what David Cameron at that point and Theresa May when she was Home Secretary felt, that you, the public, should have a more direct say in how you want your communities, your streets, your towns, your villages to be policed, to be kept safer, to make sure that it's reflecting your concerns and your issues. And that's why they did away with the 28 invisible people you didn't know about and put one person, me, there. Yes, I did run for Parliament and I wasn't elected, so I guess you could call that a failure. I don't see it as a failure. I see it as part of my process of growing as somebody who is an elected representative and really wants to be connecting with you. And actually, Darren, I'm really pleased you're online, listening, watching, and giving us your feedback. So thank you for that. Okay, so moving on then to the next question. We have a question here. Are Hampshire Police committed to the cadet scheme, and what does it does it often result in cadets becoming police officers? And that's from Paul in Southsea.
Thanks, Paul. Massively committed to our cadet scheme. So we have cadet schemes all over the constabulary area, and it's great that they're back in the real world now. They kept on going virtually during COVID, and I know that was a tough time for all of them, and they're a really important part of our police family. And we deliberately have our cadet schemes in all areas, not just the areas that other kind of cadet groups can be. So that's a really important part of us. Being connected with our communities, and they are brilliant young people, and whenever I go there, they give you a real buzz. So they serve their public today, so they do loads of things, particularly at our big public events, which are starting to come back in, aren't they, this summer. So they're there, they do lots of supportive work, they do lots of stuff in their local communities, and that's part of them growing into active citizens, supported by great volunteers, many of whom in their day jobs are members of paid police officer or police staff, and then they volunteer as cadet leaders in their own time, and that's just fantastic to see as well. So people giving back even more than they do as paid public servants. So we have lots of cadets. They range from 13 to 17, and then they do have to leave us, and what we try and do is keep in touch. And there are some really great officers. I've been here long enough now to see some of our cadets in various uniforms, whether as police community support officers or police officers. But equally, some go off, do other things, take other paths, whether that's employment or education, and then they come back to us later on. Many join the special constabulary actually, either locally or where they're studying. So for me, the police cadets are really important. They are a way today that we keep connected with the young people. We help them grow to be brilliant citizens, and we support them as they make a very real difference in their communities. And they also keep policing in their hearts as they grow up. And as I say, some of them stay connected, and as many as they can, they're always welcome.
Yeah, and you know what, I think our volunteers across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are fantastic. We've got mounted volunteers as well. So if you're a horse rider or someone who's in the countryside area and you want to be a mounted volunteer, please email me, email my office, and we will make sure we get you connected up. And I think that the police cadets are fantastic. They are, it's such a fantastic way of getting young people engaged with policing in a positive way. And one of the things, again, when I met with the policing minister yesterday morning, the government are considering kind of like almost like an emergency services cadet force, so for sort of ambulance, fire and police combined. So perhaps you think a life in the kind of blue light services is a career that you'd like to follow, but you don't know which one yet. And you know that for those of you that have got teenagers that have done the CPF, that gives you a taste of Army, Navy, Air Force. Well, it's very much a similar sort of thing, and it's something he was talking about yesterday. A question from Hayley in Waterlooville, probably one for me actually on this one, although it'd be good to get your take on this, Olivia, as well. Are you going to increase the number of police stations? Well, actually, we do have police stations in many more areas than people realise. Every town, the cities have got, a few police stations. Every town has a police station, and actually some of our bigger villages have got neighbourhood representation, whether it might be in a fire station, such as in Redbridge, or, wherever it is. But yes, Olivia's Uplift programme, the number of new officers that she is recruiting then means that we're going to need some more space for them to work from. So I'm working with the constabulary. So with the police buildings, I'm the landlord and Olivia is the tenant. So the police work in the buildings, but the strategy, the repairs, the maintenance, looking after them, buying leases, selling leases, particularly with my background in property and estates, is something that I'm really looking at that at the moment. And I'm going to be rewriting the estate strategy. I will be consulting with you on that, and I should mention that my police and crime plan is out for consultation right now, and there will be more information coming through my Facebook page and through the constabulary's Facebook page on my police and crime plan. If you have just joined us, it's 6:37. We're intending to carry on until 7 o'clock, but of course we don't want to leave lots of questions unanswered. We're going to try and get through as many as we can. If you are just joining us, don't worry if you missed the first part, because you can go back and watch this. It'll all be saved on both the Hampshire Constabulary Facebook page and social media channels, and on my page straight after this event finishes. The video will be there for you to go back and watch. Please keep your comments coming in. They're coming through thick and fast. I can see them all, which is absolutely brilliant. Bitton Police Station in Southampton is one that will be reopening, and I'm looking at many others, working with Olivia for the needs that she has for where her response and patrol teams are, and where neighbourhood teams are based as well. So a question around domestic violence, and there's quite a lot that's actually come in around domestic violence, and I've got a question I'm going to put to Olivia. I've been to Southampton and Portsmouth custody on a few occasions, and actually the number of people in custody in both Southampton and Portsmouth, and I'm going to the Basingstoke Police Investigation Centre in a couple of weeks. Over half of the people in custody were suspected perpetrators of domestic violence. And actually, Becca Smith is saying, what are you doing about domestic abuse affecting male victims? So it's not just male victims as well. They are still being undermined and not believed on the basis of their gender. Officers gaslight them and refuse to investigate, and the complaints procedure is even more traumatic. Dealing with your services often means there's further abuse, etc. Well, I mean, I have to say that, I think the constabulary are very alive to the fact that there are male victims out there. I've had some positive feedback from our victims, but I'm going to hand over to Olivia to answer the question about domestic abuse per se, and then about the men as well, if that's okay.
Sure. So if it sounds like you've got some specific experience there of where things haven't gone right. So if you want to, please, if it's through this Facebook Live or come into me, then we'll sort that out. If there's something particularly in your mind that you feel hasn't gone well, then I'd want to know about it. Generally, because of course sorry, I don't know the particular example you have in mind that's behind the question. This is a massive deal for us in Hampshire Constabulary, has been for a long time. To give you a sense of scale, 1 in 6 things we go to every day is domestic abuse. The vast majority of victims are women, but not all. And I am really clear on that. And all my officers and all the people who answer the phone and pick up the 101 and pick up the digital stuff know that too. So that this is not news, and this is something we are very, very, very clear on. So we've got very comprehensive plans around domestic abuse. We have lots of layers to that. So there's the child-centered nature of it. We know most domestic abuse is between partners, but we also know it happens in different layers of families too. And we have all sorts of kind of tools in our toolkit. The most important thing we do is keep people safe. So if someone has been brave enough to tell us, we know that that's often the tip of an iceberg that's been going on for a long time. We know that at that first call. So we will always ask lots of questions about what's gone on before, and we want to make sure that we understand the whole. And we also understand that that can come from people who are living with this slowly, because it's hugely traumatic, even saying out loud, this is something you're living with. And of course, we've had 18 months of COVID. When COVID struck in spring of last year, I knew that home was not going to be the safe place it should be when people were locked down. And we absolutely pivoted our service to make sure that we were alongside people. We asked the right questions. We continued to absolutely deal. We didn't miss a step in being there for people who suddenly in lockdown were even more afraid and living with even more trauma and horror than they were before. So we have a number of things. So we, first of all, you know, we prioritize attending, but we also know, and there's a huge amount of science behind this, that for some people who are living with domestic abuse, actually dealing with someone on the phone without someone sat, you know, on their sofa talking to them can be a better way. So we're really kind of nuanced about how we talk to people who are living with abuse and get their information and help them make good choices. Obviously, there are lots of things that only the police can do, and one of which is arresting perpetrators. We arrest the vast majority of people who commit domestic abuse. Sometimes the very nature of us arresting creates a safe space for someone to help, you know, get some space in their mind to make choices that we can help them. And we have fantastic services which Donna commissions to get alongside people and you know, help them kind of break this cycle of fear that they're living with. We know about stalking. We're really good around harassment. We have fantastic stuff about trying to, you know, work with perpetrators, many of whom, the vast majority of whom are men, but not all, to help them kind of break that cycle as well. It's far from a soft option, believe me, it's a very tough option, but if it can break that cycle of offending, then we absolutely want them to do. And internally, so that we keep on top and we keep my workforce aware of the nuance around domestic abuse and how complicated it is. We have a massive network internally of domestic abuse champions. We have over 600 people who every month are checking on how we've done on calls, picking up, you know, looking at crime reports, picking up, are we spotting signs of high risk behavior, all the stuff that we should be doing. Over 600 dedicated people, people who are dedicated to it. They have day jobs, and this is something that they choose to do on behalf of that, and they do all that ringing up and that checking. We also have loads of advice on our mobiles as people are going around, officers are going around, and we also have real experts in all of our investigation centres. So I'm sitting now in Portsmouth Investigation Centre. There are, you know, dedicated specialist domestic abuse support team who can help an investigator understand, well, hang on, I know I can try this. Can I do this as well? What about this, that, and the other? Because there are so many different ways that we can investigate, put people before the courts, yes, break that cycle of offending and make sure that people are safe. It's a horrible, horrible crime. It happens in all areas of our geography. It happens in all aspects of our society. It's a real cancer in society, and it's something that we put a huge amount of effort into.
Yeah, thank you very much. And just to say that I've just secured £47,000 to help male victims as well. So, and that's not just around domestic abuse, it's also around suicide, and there's a whole load of stuff going on. So very, very aware and live of the issue around male victims as well. So thank you for that. And as Olivia has said, through my office, we do commission services through organisations like Yellow Door in Southampton, who are amazing, Stop Domestic Abuse, who do both Hampshire and the Portsmouth, sort of down the eastern side of the county. We've got integrated domestic abuse practitioners, both supporting children and men or women, depending on who the victims are. So you can talk to people confidentially. And for anybody out there, actually, I should just give a little plug here to Crime Stoppers. If you don't want to talk to the police, if you want to report intelligence or information about someone that might be living next door, who you think might be selling drugs, or you are concerned about knife usage, or teenagers you think are doing things they shouldn't be doing, or perhaps something, neglect of a child, you can phone Crime Stoppers completely confidentially. They cannot see your phone number. They cannot get access to your IP address if you email and do a report online. They are a fantastic organisation. So make sure, if you do want to report crime, and you can also go to Citizens Advice, the CAB across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and you can go and report crime to them. Again, it doesn't have to be directly to the police. So if you're a young person out there, you've got information, but you're worried about retribution, you can do it confidentially. Okay, so Ray Palmer has asked a question saying, do you worry that so many people are dissatisfied with policing in their area? I understand that there are big fish to fry. There are lots of big fish to fry out there, but what is happening locally is key to them as well. How will the PCC redress the balance to ensure that, for example, county lines, drug dealing, child exploitation, cybercrime are all dealt with, but at the same time, the crucial but lesser stuff like illegal driving, cycling on pavements, e-scooters and general ASB are being addressed with as much determination? Okay, so quite a big question there. I'm going to bring Olivia on that one in a second, if that's okay. But from my perspective as Police and Crime Commissioner, first of all, I think you made a really good point. Number one is about lack of confidence in policing. And number two is about, what am I going to do? And there is still a misunderstanding out there about what police and crime commissioners, who are they? What do they do? What's their remit? Well, you're not there to run the police, because that's what the chief constable does. So what am I here for? And one of the things that I need to do over the next 3 years of my term of office is to educate people and explain to them. And doing events like this are absolutely key. I'm in charge of the budget, working with Olivia and saying, right, this is where I think we should be spending money. Olivia will come back to me and say, need to spend it here, need to spend it there, need to spend more on horses, or on drones, or on armoured vehicles, or whatever it might be. But we need to agree that between us, setting the budget. I set the policing priorities, but importantly, it's not all about policing. It's also about criminal justice. And there's a huge part of my role, which is very much in the criminal justice world, that people don't understand. Now, my background, as I said at the beginning, for those that have perhaps joined midway through, I was a magistrate for 16 years. So being in that CJ, that as we refer to, criminal justice world, is actually quite comfortable for me, because it's where I was for 16 years, as well as being leader of a city council. So I've commissioned services through the council. I've worked with victims for years. I've seen perpetrators, repeat offenders coming through the system. I very quickly learned to spot a heroin addict when they came into court, because through the colour of their skin, through knowing the kind of background, the very often very atypical background that drug addicts, particularly younger people, will have had, that leads them to making these really terrible life decisions. So my job is about listening to you, representing you, and making sure you're heard. Now, in terms of the question that raises, what am I going to do to make sure that there is a priority on some of the lesser stuff? So the speeding, or the cycling on pavements, or e-scooters. Well, actually, in fairness to the constabulary, because of the austerity programme, the number of police officers did drop. And it's not rocket science. As I said, less police officers means less ability to respond to some of those medium and lower level crimes. But now we have the police uplift programme. Now we've got 600 more officers that will be operational, trained, and on our streets, by the spring, summer of 2023. And both Olivia and I are committed to making sure that we go beyond the 600. We can't commit to that right now, but when we find money, either in her budget, in my budget, wherever we can drive efficiency through the constabulary to employ more police officers, that absolutely is a priority, certainly for me. And I think Olivia shares that, but she will speak for herself in a moment. So from my perspective, it's about now saying to the constabulary, right, okay, to Olivia, you've got these 600 more cops coming. We now need to be doing a little bit more on the medium harm and some of the lower level harm, and particularly around that ASB issue. Very often the police get called when antisocial behaviour issues have escalated, but actually the solution and the root cause of it is not necessarily criminal. The criminal effect is the outcome at the end of the chain after things have been breaking down between neighbours or relationships, for example, in personal relationships. So I've set up an antisocial behaviour task force. I did that in July. First one the constabulary has had that's involved the PCC. I'm jointly leading it with Chief Inspector Dave Humphreys, who is one of Olivia's team. He works in the neighbourhood policing team based in the Eastern Division, but has a remit across the whole of the constabulary when it comes to ASB. And this is not for individual one-off circumstances. This is things like kids jumping in the water in the River Hamble at Netley Abbey. This is kids jumping off the hot walls in Old Portsmouth. That happens every single year, tombstoning and putting themselves in real danger from harm in the summer months. This is dirt bikes going around Shirley, Millbrook Towers, and all of that stuff in Southampton. And we are dealing with it. The Constabulary Roads team are looking at that right now. If you live in that area, we know it's an issue. It's not being ignored. We are looking at, the constabulary are looking at what they're going to do. So these issues, bigger issues, can be fed up to the ASB task force. I've got a pot of money that I'm able to use to either commission services, motivate organisations like that to support, and also cameras or lighting or whatever it might be. But working with the councils is absolutely key, because not all of the solutions here rest with the constabulary or me through commissioning. It's a wider piece. So I'm going to ask Olivia if perhaps you could just talk a little bit about ASB and some of those kind of medium, lower level harm crime type things, and what your take is on those.
Sure, thank you. And Ray, thanks for your question. I'm going to challenge you back though a bit in that actually, I mean, you started your question by saying confidence in the police and Hampshire Constabulary is low. It isn't, and this isn't just me marking my own homework. There's lots of independent surveys, many of which the Commissioner starts and commissions. You know, mid-80s confidence in policing. Used to be 8 out of 10 cats was pretty good. Actually, we do have the confidence of our communities. Not all, I accept that. I'll never be complacent, but I do know that, and I get so many letters of thanks, so many comments about how my officers and staff have gone over and above to do the most extraordinary things, as well as very small but very important acts of kindness, because we know we are there when people have got their darkest days, and we can make that day a bit better. So I would really challenge you back on that, Ray, if I may. And I know I can't see you, so I don't know how that feels. But in terms of, you know, that balance that you described, first of all, you know, the most awful things that happen don't happen kind of in the ether. They happen in streets, in neighborhoods, in villages, in towns, in cities. So knife crime happens somewhere, in a place where someone lives. Rapes happen somewhere. These things are awful. And of course, the police should be there if it goes on, and we are. But I would much prefer it didn't happen in the first place. So we put enormous efforts into stopping those dreadful things happening, which of course, you know, then isn't seen because the thing hasn't happened. So whether that's knife crime or robbery or rape or county lines, there is so much that we do around that, and we're disrupting, you know, even just over the last year, over 30 county lines, safeguarding dozens of kids, children who are being trafficked around the UK and abused horribly to bring crime, to bring drugs to people's doors. That is not okay, and you would expect your police service to be at the forefront of that, and we are, alongside the National Crime Agency and others. That is stuff that we do day in, day out. We're really taking the fight to the criminals, Ray, and we will never ever stop doing that. But as Donna said, we absolutely balance that with stuff that also happens in neighbourhoods, because these things are not divorced from one another. And antisocial behaviour is a real blight on people's lives, and that's why we retain and you know, really fiercely retain our neighbourhood policing model, because we need to do both. They're not distinct. You know what? The two come together all the time. So in antisocial behavior specifically, it's something that we do a huge amount with, and we work hand in glove with local authorities, because that's how you tackle it. So, you know, one of the most brilliant partners we can have around antisocial behavior is the housing team in the local authority, because they're the ones that can really make the difference and really kind of disrupt people. And we've had so many examples of disruptions in Eastleigh, in Fareham. Very recently, there'd been an example of 18 years of problems. That's been dealt with by the neighbour policing team and the local authority housing team together. There's examples of that in Shirley. There's examples of that in Winchester, where there was a real problem with really antisocial street drinking. That has been a fantastic success. Neighbour policing team together with Winchester City Council. So we do this, and we do take it seriously. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes many iterations of someone through the court, and you have to kind of show this pattern of behaviour. And I understand why. I understand, you know, the limits of sentencing and so on. But we absolutely do that. And there's all sorts of tools in our toolkit that we can use, from community protection orders and notices and closing of premises. You know, there's a whole host of stuff that we do. But the reality for us, Ray, is it's no different from a hospital that has to make choices about how many heart bypasses versus how many bad knees, and how, you know, that's the nature of public service. What I will always say is the promises we make, we keep. But I will always continue to tackle that high harm stuff that thankfully most people don't see, but sadly it is absolutely going on everywhere, together with the stuff that people do see and feel, because I know they both of those things matter. So we do enjoy the confidence of our communities. We guard it very preciously. I'll always want to explain and to raise that figure, but we do have to do both, and we will continue doing both.
Thank you, Olivia. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes left. 2 more themes I want to put to our Chief Constable, Olivia Pinckney. And if you have been with us for the long haul, if you're here from the beginning, then thank you very much for your time, your questions, and your attention today. So this question, I'm going to ask a question about speeding traffic and noisy motorbikes and exhaust. But before we get to that final question, this one is about serious violent crime, which actually Olivia's just touched on. And the question is from the Hampshire Youth Commission. I'm aware of operations being carried out locally, but is anything being done to protect young people from county lines drug taking, which you've just covered, but actually also talking about knife crime in Eastleigh in particular?
So county lines is a big problem that we worry about a great deal, and through Donna we have also violence reduction units who are, that is the way to tackle this, as well as the kind of the formal law enforcement, if you like. But as I say, we deal with the National Crime Agency, with the Met, with other areas, and we got great success in taking out an awful lot of county lines, arresting a lot of people, taking a lot of guns off the street, safeguarding a lot of children. That is what we do. It is difficult, gritty stuff, but we absolutely take that fight to the criminals, and we will continue to do so. And we are learning from around the country. There's really quick learning, because, you know, criminals are clever, they evolve very fast. We need to keep evolving with them. But there is always massive harm, and recreational drugs are far from victimless in terms of what I see every day and what I know goes on every day. In terms of knife crime, you know, I know that most young people carry knives because they're scared, and you get this vicious cycle of young people thinking everyone else is carrying a knife, so they better have a knife. And too often I'm knowing about young people stabbing another young child, where actually even a few years ago they might have had a fist fight, but now they use a knife because they've got one. But the nature of whatever dispute they had hasn't changed. But sadly, the consequences are so much more serious. In Eastleigh particularly, it's absolutely right. You know, behind your question there, we have had some real successes, and all credit to the neighbour policing team there. So we've had a number of operations in Eastleigh. Our overall kind of knife crime operation is called Operation Sept, which is across the constabulary. But in Eastleigh in particular, we use a Section 60 power, which is one where we can describe a geographic area, and we have to justify it, quite rightly, but we describe a geographic area in which we're going to do lots and lots of stop and search, which is a brilliant tool. We hold it lightly in our hands, but it is a brilliant tool for us, where we can, because we knew there were some real problems around gangs of young people halt with knives, particularly around the train station and town centres. So we've used that. We do loads in our schools and with businesses around education, around the risks of carrying a knife, and all credit to Eastleigh Borough Council Community Safety Partnership as well, who've done lots and lots with us. So there's been a real success in Eastleigh. It's sadly we had to do it there because we knew that there was this bubbling activity around, not all at all, but some young people who were putting themselves and others at risk in that way. So we've done an awful lot there, but we have all those same tools in our toolkit should it bubble up, and as and when it does bubble up elsewhere around the country. But the biggest thing is that is just not to feel that you have to carry a knife, because it just escalates the risk to everyone, not least of which to yourself. So that thinking hard about whether you're going to carry a knife or not is a really important message.
It really is. And like I say, Crime Stoppers, if you're concerned and you want to pass information back confidentially, and also through my office, we pay Victims Care free service, that if you have been a victim of any kind of crime, or one of your children has, or someone who's a family or a friend, they can contact Victims Care. It doesn't even matter if the crime was a year ago, 2 years ago, contact them and they've got specialists who can help you. So final question then around speeding and noisy motorbikes. I've got many questions around this that are coming from various people, so I'm not going to name check them all, because it is a recurrent theme that's coming in lots of the questions, both before the event this evening and this evening online. And also my post bag in terms of my casework as your commissioner, I also get lots of casework around speeding issues, and particularly around across the Meon Valley, the A272, the A32, noisy motorbikes, Military Road on the Isle of Wight. Bob Seeley, the MP there, has been in contact with me about that issue, and in fact I met with Bob in Parliament yesterday, and he gave me some more feedback on that, so I'm working with him on the solution. So to Olivia, can you just give us a quick overview of what we're doing around speeding traffic and noise exhausts?
Sure. So and sometimes they're linked and sometimes they're not. So speeding traffic, we absolutely want to know about it. We do a lot of where enforcement is appropriate, but actually road safety is the focus, and speeding is one of the fatal four. And we look at both enforcement but also speed bumps, that kind of thing, which is where the local authorities in all our areas work really closely with us. So if we know we've got a problem area, as I say, keep telling us, because there are other ways as well as enforcement. Big shout out for Community Speed Watch. It's great that post-COVID they can be out and about. And they are fantastic, because most people who speed tend to be local, because it's just me and it's just the rat run. So actually that education, that nudge that we know, please don't do it again, works in the vast majority of cases. And Community Speed Watch and policing work hand in glove. But of course we have dedicated teams, roads policing with all sorts of kit. And when we know the intelligence is there, we will make sure that we put that on our patrol plan and go and work there and try and put a stop to it. In terms of noise, and I really know when the sun's out, there are certain areas, 272, 32, but others as well, where that noise is a real blight and it's a real antisocial behavior issue. So again, we do a lot of work there, and Donna is looking really creatively at what else might be possible for us to trial. The legislation, going back a bit where we were with e-scooters earlier on in this evening, the legislation is a bit tricky because some noise isn't illegal. It actually can be pretty noisy before it's illegal, and even then to prove it evidentially is a whole host of things that have to be leapt over. So I would much rather it wasn't happening in the first place. So the more we can do to educate, the more we can do to stop, the more we can do to kind of send notices to people to say, look, when you were doing this, we know you were doing it, please stop. That will get the numbers of people down. But I know it's a real blight, and we do put our patrols out where we can, and we do prioritise, and we've done an awful lot of that. And in fact, even only last weekend, over in Sainsbury's over in Hampshire, our roads policing responded to a gathering there, and they used, very creatively, some legislation to seize some cars, to seize cars and to put a stop to it. So we do use, the various kind of laws that are available to us when we've got really antisocial behavior driving. Dangerous driving is one thing, but a lot of this is antisocial behavior driving, and that, that's a bit more tricky to enforce. We will do it, and we do it, but equally I'd much rather we stopped it in its tracks in the first place.
Yeah, thank you very much. And actually, as Olivia just alluded to, I am looking at investing in some special cameras that do monitor both speed and noise, so vibration, when you have got very loud exhaust. But as Olivia said, actually, those exhausts can be quite loud without being illegal. And when I did meet with Olivia and I met with the Hampshire MPs, Hampshire and Isle of Wight MPs in Westminster yesterday. And it's actually one of the things that one of the MPs said, you know what, we need to look at that decibel level, because if it is becoming such a blight on people, or there are retrofitted illegal exhausts, we need to do more about that. So I'm looking at a trial. If we can get that working, supported by the Hampshire Roads Police Unit, I will be bringing some information back to you about that soon. So before we sign off and say goodbye, both of us, I want to say thank you to all of you who have joined, who've been there from the beginning, right the way through, the old timers who've been there for the whole 1 hour and 4 minutes. And thank you for feeding your questions through. Good, bad, feedback, you know, we are going to sit and read them all after this as well to make sure that we're really absorbing them. But as your new commissioner and as the first COPS, the Commissioner's Oversight of Policing Services session that we've had this evening, I'd also love to hear on the bottom if you think this is a good idea. Do you like it? You know, you can tap in and watch this when you're on the bus traveling or the train traveling to or from work, because they'll all be saved on both Constabulary and my Facebook page. And a couple of little, in 20 seconds, facts that I learned since becoming commissioner. Number one, we share a police unit with Thames Valley Police, which is fantastic. So they really lead on the police horses, and we need them for riot, public order type stuff. We lead on a marine unit, so keeping our rivers and our sea. We've obviously got mostly sea and the water, obviously the solent here that we are trying to police and keep safe. So we have a marine unit, and we share that with Thames Valley. They have a police, the horses unit, which we share. We also share police dogs. There is so much more specialism and armed police as well that we're sharing with Thames Valley Police, who are our kind of brother, sister, whichever way you want to look at it, police force. And it does mean on that 101 and 999 call centre, which I was really impressed to find out that if there was ever a power surge, a power cut, something should happen with our 101 call centre in Hampshire, it would automatically defer to Thames Valley, and they can deploy people to 999 and 101 calls straight from Reading or wherever it is they're answering their calls. They can get our officers out deployed straight away, so keeping us all really safe. So huge thank you to Olivia for giving up her time this evening, and to all of you. And if you want to say a final word, Olivia, before we sign off.
Thanks, Donna. It's been, you know, so many questions. And like you say, I'll have a good look at everything that's come in written down wise and make sure we deal with them all. But thank you. And I look forward to another one of these.
Thank you very much. Bye.